Mecha BREAK just concluded its second playtest session on August 13th, and boy did it deliver. We also got some exciting news into the future of the game from an interview with the lead director Chris Kwok, who also plays the game on a flight sim setup, so he's already winning me over. Now, I personally am beyond excited for this game, and so today, I'll be diving into what Mecha BREAK has to offer, exploring its strengths, weaknesses, and the potential impact on the mecha genre. But what exactly do I mean by that? Well, if we go back to the late 90s and early 2000s, despite always being a rather niche genre, mecha games actually used to be a lot more prominent than they are nowadays. Back then, it wasn't uncommon to see at least an attempt at a mecha-themed title from some bigger gaming companies like Capcom, Activision, Konami, Square Enix, and even Sierra Entertainment. Wait a minute. However, as the years went on, unless it was Gundam related, this really started to slow down, and by the PS4 and Xbox One era, mecha games became scarce. Mech Warrior and... is it Daemon X Machina? Or is it like Hunter x Hunter where I just say Daemon Machina? I don't know, but these were both notable exceptions, and while its Titanfall seemed like it could have led the mecha genre out of the darkness, I think most of us know how that story goes by now. Steam also has a variety of mecha games in its catalog, but until Armored Core returned with 6, we really haven't had anything that put enough ripples in the water for mecha as a genre to really catch eyes in the gaming industry. However, I think most of us know that FromSoft's previously earned notoriety definitely had some impact on its success.
Everyone thinks you're my older brother. I'm the older brother. Me!
Now, without that same coattail to ride, I could understand why both developers and publishers alike could still be a bit hesitant to try and throw their hat in the mecha ring, as it's never really taken off in the West outside of Gundam. But that is all the more reason why I imagine they will be watching Mecha BREAK's future with great interest. I did want to make it clear though that I'm not saying that the success of this one game is going to suddenly start making mecha games start popping up out of nowhere, but if it is successful on top of Armored Core's resurgence, I could see companies being a little more open to the idea of making more mech games again. Also, let me get it out of the way that this is not a sponsored video. I'd legally have to tell you if it was. This is just my take because I really enjoyed this game and think it has the potential to be great in its own right while simultaneously breaking the mold. Now, so far, Mecha BREAK has been a genuinely great experience that feels amazing in its design. While fast-paced, it's a much different feeling than the later Armored Core titles, while still retaining that feeling that you're actually piloting a mech. Speaking of, in Mecha BREAK, you pilot one of many mechs called Strikers, which each have awesome designs and unique abilities that I'd compare to a mix of Gundam Seed and 00 in terms of how evolved their technology and power scaling feels. While you were restricted to a default loadout for the playtest, I had speculated that in the future we would likely have some sort of ability to customize the actual loadouts of these strikers, which was later confirmed in the previously mentioned interview.
对，你7万拿到的时候来讲的话，是只有驾驶员和对应冥神的这个配色，对吧？是一个配色改色，对。但是那是在未来来讲的话。实际上，你能拿到了特装机的驾驶员之外，你还能拿到过来了。对，那它的保留了原本冥神的设计语言，但是来讲的话，我们有它的专属配色，甚至有它的家徽，在它肩膀上家徽也是不一样的，这是我们的特装。
So on that note, I'll go ahead and segue into the concern most people have for this game. Now, Mecha BREAK is set to be a free-to-play live service. Whoa, hold up. PvE and single-player enthusiasts, bear with me please. I'm an advocate for your side and have remarks on that shortly. Just give me another minute or so and I promise I'll get to that and the community's biggest concern. Mods. Now, love it or hate it, the new age of live service gaming can potentially, emphasis on potentially, have a symbiotic relationship between customers and gaming companies that allows for a game to have more sustainability on both sides. In the shortest way to sum it up, ideally, customers get more content, companies get more money. It makes sense as to why this is becoming more and more prevalent in the current gaming marketplace, but here's where I think Mecha BREAK can change things up. I think it should pull a reverse Fortnite while continuing to sustain the live service portions of the game. And for those of you who are confused by what I mean by that, let me explain. Fortnite was not originally supposed to be a live service battle royale. It was a PvE zombie survival game that was intended to be sort of a Minecraft Left 4 Dead hybrid that they just decided to add a battle royale mode to, which then blew up into the pop culture multiverse deity that we know today. Now, Mecha BREAK, on the other hand, I believe has the potential to balance these elements effectively, as this already has the foundation to craft a PvE single player and or co-op experience with the elements presented in just a tutorial, as well as some information revealed in the interview. Despite another notorious game failing to accomplish this, let's take a moment to look at what this offers before we even touch PvP. After creating your pilot, you are thrown into a cutscene where your garrison is under attack, leading to a near-death experience before boarding the first striker you'll come across, the Ulysses. From here, you do a little bit of tutorialing and learn the basics against some weak enemies as you try to escape before your ship blows up. After that, you're confronted by an imposing mech before you escape by free-falling towards the planet, where we enter the debris of a ruined city and clear out a few more enemies before learning that we were blindsided by a faction called Thea's Vanguard. We then come across another striker called Wurin, which we have yet to see as a playable striker, but between the red glowing energy and skull faction logo, I could see this being one of many PvE enemies, and possibly even a mass-produced Welkin. This fight is likely intended to show you how some of your other mechanics work, but once they're defeated, you clear out a few more mobs when it's time for some payback against Makalu, that giant striker that attacked you earlier. You receive some backup from a couple other strikers and wipe it out pretty easily, which clears out the first part of the tutorial meant to teach you the absolute basics. After that, it throws you into a couple of matches with AI to get you warmed up, but that's not really what I'd like to focus on. This initial tutorial is exactly why I say this game has the foundation to set up a PvE experience. They've already laid out everything a campaign needs. An opposing faction, well-done designs, and an interesting universe all packed nicely within gameplay that is executed in a way that really makes for a good mecha feel. The sound design, abilities, smoothness of control, and weight of the mechs feels great. If they were to write a well-fleshed-out story that creates interesting scenarios for the various roles, I could see this being a very successful single-player or co-op experience that allows for players to assemble in a squad with friends, or computer-controlled allies to still play into the formula they have currently set up for the different striker roles. As for the interview, we've recently heard from executive producer Chris Kwok, where he revealed that we'll be able to freely control our characters and learn more about the in-game pilots like the ones we could purchase for the Narukami, Falcon, and Tricera. I also happened upon this part of an answer from Chris where he mentions that Leonie's Falcon was originally built by Bifrost specifically for her. When they recovered it, it was nearly ready for the scrap heap, though through a technical exchange and spare parts from Bifrost, they restored this Falcon, which is the one you see in the hangar. Imagine playing through the individual pilots' campaign so you could experience their story leading up to the present timeline, and or more. This will likely lead to people becoming more attached to the characters and franchise as they find out more about this universe and what crazy feats these pilots have accomplished. From Armored Core 6's player base alone, there is a large amount of PvE-only players who are definitely in the market for another story-driven mecha game, and I know I can see myself throwing some money at another full campaign experience like that. On top of all this, they are introducing a game mode that is PVEVP and also addresses our concern with mods, which I'll just let Chris explain here.
玩家来讲话呢，是一个3上它是一个战术策略，意味着说玩家来讲话在里边就是打 NPC、打 BOSS、打精英、收刮物资，把它带。那这个 PVE 来讲话呢，我们也准备了很多，我想还原的是很多经典玩家看到的很多经典场景。对，那因为大家知道吗？就是人与人斗的机甲，看上去战果虽然激烈，但是玩家也死很多次。你可以看到，就是一场要击坠好多次，非常激烈。对，所以说很激烈。但是我知道玩家心里面应该有一个梦想，就是说我能不能秒杂兵？这个游戏除了我们在一次性的，比如升级的产出之外来讲的话，它更多来讲的话是在马赛马克玩家要自己捡出去。那马赛马克捡出去之外来讲的话，其实这个改建来讲的话，其实是帮助玩家来讲的话怎么去调教你的机体。对，那这个调教的机体很好玩，意味着说有加的，它就有玩家能从很细小的、微小的这里面找到他自己的手感和节奏。那这些改建是给他们拿这个做这个用的，对，所以说来讲话是绝对就是在，反正对于我们解天机来讲话，Pay to Win 这件事情是不能接受的，我们也不会考虑这个东西拿来卖。所以说解天机未来的商业模式来讲话，其实更多的都是表现性的道具。
So despite the PvP aspect of that equation not really being talked about as in-depth as I was hoping, if I'm interpreting this correctly, it'll be more focused on fighting PvE enemies to extract the mods you use to tune your striker, which I think is actually a brilliant way to give us both more content and allow players some mental relief from the stress that is PvP. I am interested to see if the PvP part of that equation will be more like a race to the mods, or if players can sabotage and steal from another squad. Also, Chris, I see them Gunpla. We getting any striker model kits? Cause I know I'm not alone on wanting to build up some of them bad boys, and tell you what. Now, I've been gushing about the potential of this game for a while now, so let's move on to my actual experience from the playtest and my overall criticisms that are both good and bad. As you can likely tell from the rest of this, I thoroughly enjoyed the playtest. I am not usually one for PvP, but I think between getting roped into Armored Core 6's PvP scene and my love for Mecha, I had enough drive to give this a chance, and my overall thoughts on it are very positive. Now, I knew going into this that the customization wasn't going to be anything like Armored Core, so I had my expectations set there. But even then, I was pleasantly surprised at the depth you had for both your own pilot and the strikers themselves. Pilots you can, well, you got some great assets you can customize, and the sliders allow for everything from your dream avatar to some Monster Factory level shit like our good friend Dirk did here. Personally, I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't any long hair for the fellas, but I'm hoping there'll be some more options available once it's fully released. The customization is also very in-depth for the strikers, though we trade the sliders for an extensive amount of options for individual segments and accents when making the color schemes for your strikers. You also have a set of removable decals for each striker that look great and have a Vercar level of detail to their placement for all of you Gunpla fans out there. I do think it'd be neat if we could maybe choose which segments we'd like them on though, cause I wasn't the biggest fan of the flame on my Aquila's shoulder, but kept it anyway for the rest of the decals. Now, mods as previously covered by Chris give both a buff and a debuff. Though depending on the rarity of the mod, the percentage will vary, and so far your debuff will never outweigh the buff, but we'll have to see how that goes for the lower rarities. Mods are also assigned to one of 5 categories, which have a limit of 3 parts each when equipping them, so the depth here is actually pretty nice as you find what compromises you want to make. Do note that you can have 2 of the same buffs with different debuffs like these 2 for example. Now, while the majority of these will be impactful to stats that affect everyone like health, energy, the various defensive stats, etc., there is definitely some moments that allow for a penalty-free situation like buffs on one stat that are beneficial, while dumping melee-related stats for a striker that has no melee whatsoever. I don't think this will lead to anything too unbalanced, but I wanted to at least point it out so you were aware. For now, I don't really see any issues with this, but I do think official tournaments should probably make everybody enter without mods just for a completely even playing field. Surprisingly, the devs actually already held a tournament during the playtest, and they did in fact enforce that as a rule, so that is awesome to see, and it's also just awesome to see them being so active within the community. In fact, they actually released a balance patch mid-playtest, which was well needed, but while we're on that note, let's go ahead and cover and so the description I see this game given most of the time is that it's like Mecha Overwatch, and while I see some of these points, I don't think that it's giving an accurate depiction on how it feels to play this game. Now, where I love this but absolutely hated Gundam Evolution was this has its own identity and feeling that is so fun. Mecha BREAK feels like it has been made by someone who understands mechs and loves mechs just as much as we do. You can tell that a lot of thought went into each and every striker they have given us. Meanwhile, Gundam Evolution to me and many others feels like nothing more than an Overwatch clone wearing Gundam skins. And even that they couldn't get right. To this day, it bugs the absolute hell out of me that Exia's ranged attack is to throw daggers when it's literally carrying a gunblade. Yes! It happened in the show, but y'all are just that desperate to make him Genji. But anyways, let's refocus on what's so good about the combat, and then the bad. Now I know I just said this, but this game is fucking fun, y'all. It feels like it was made by and for someone who loves mechs, and it comes through in the gameplay. While it's definitely on the more futuristic side of mecha, it doesn't cross that line where it's like super robot warrior style and basically works on magic. You can feel the limits of this universe's strikers in a good way, and as you pilot them, you have to respect these limits in order to even come close to becoming a Johnny Raiden or Norris Packard or whichever ace of Mecha BREAK. Now, the movement is responsive, quick, and impactful in a way that feels like a protagonist mech, but there's still consequences for just spamming all of your options with no thought in mind. The abilities or loadouts for everyone feels appropriate for what the striker's intended role is, though there are 3 on the current roster that I think need a little bit of help standing out, but I'll cover that more later. A wonderfully done sound design helps lend to a very satisfying experience, especially when you're doing melee. Though we've only had the 5 of them, during testing, map and objective diversity has been a much more pleasant experience than the burnt out feeling many of us are getting from Armored Core 6's PvP. The objectives in their simplest forms can be described as capture the flag at Eye of Mizra, domination at Kraub's Sinkhole, escort the transport at Mercury's shipyards, dismantling targets at the Cat Blanc Observatory, then last and, kind of least, search and destroy a Graceland Sky City. We'll get to that too. Out of these, my favorites are the Eye of Mizra, Mercury Shipyards, and Cat Blanc Observatory in that order. Each of these require a different approach and have enough space on the map for each role to play their part to the fullest degree. Mercury Shipyard especially requires the team to participate with the objective in mind and not just have 1v1 shootouts on the opposite side of the map. Whoops. Now, it'd take me a while to go through each and every striker, so I'll just say that I really feel like they're doing a great job at turning the respective playstyles they aimed for into unique designs that feel appropriate for their loadouts. I especially love the Aquila and Falcon both in playstyle and design. As for the slightly overtuned strikers, they have already listened to us as players and implemented a balance patch that did some good against the very overpowered kits of the deadly double Ps, Pinaka and Panther. And honestly, there's still some things that need to be addressed, so let's now move on to the bad. It's really more just like general criticism I have about the game, but there is one thing I have to address first and foremost. Melee is far too oppressive. If you are still playing Mecha BREAK in the second half of the playtest, you may have noticed a sudden shift in melee players just absolutely tearing up players, especially on the smaller maps. I truly believe this mainly stems from one part of their kit that I think really needs some nerfing, and that is their melee attack dash. If you're not already aware, pressing your melee attack once will send any of the 3 current melee capable strikers flying at breakneck speed similar to that of an assault boost from Armored Core, and it has caused many players, especially Falcons, a lot of frustration. Now, I could be wrong on this, but it seems like all 3 of the melee users have the same melee dash speed or damn near close to it. And while I think there's a need for the melee dash, I think its speed is far too excessive, even on Panther. In my opinion, Panther should be the fastest of the 3 since his kit is a strictly melee build. However, if you are a Falcon, I think it should be zippy enough to catch you, but not catch up to you. I'll explain what I mean in a hypothetical. Let's say I'm a Falcon and I'm flying into your range. I think you should be capable of intercepting me by jumping me after figuring out my pathing and knowing where to attack. However, if I notice you fast enough and have good enough reflexes, I shouldn't see a medium-weight Panther catching up and lancing my lightweight Falcon after giving it everything I got. The drop in energy kits Panther received was a good start, but I still think the 3 melee strikers are going way too fast during the melee dash. Especially Welkin. I find it absolutely bonkers that something that is classified as a heavy is capable as traveling as fast as it does. Now, the only other thing I really found to be a bit too much even after the nerf was Pinaka, or more so, the uptime on its shield. If it is not broken, Pinaka's shield only has a 1-second uptime before you're able to shield yourself or another player, again, giving them an instant wall against all attacks on top of heals. Again, the shield is also fairly durable, so though repeated uses will leave it worse for wear over time, unless your team is just constantly dying, the shield will probably be mostly restored by the time you need to use it again. I know many of us out there felt the impact when facing a team with Pinaka while your team was without one, and on top of this, it outclasses Lumine by such a big margin that it really feels like why even play them besides to spite Pinaka. And that sucks, because many of us think Lumine is such a cool striker. As much as I love them though, we'll have to round back to them after the 1.5 more critiques I had. So, how many of you like Graceland Sky City? Because motherfucker, everyone I have talked to or seen talk about it loathes that map. And I don't think that's necessarily from it being in elimination mode. Sure, it sucks to die first, but that's just the name of the game, and the high risk of this search and destroy sort of mode is definitely appealing to some players, though maybe there could be another respawn use and or point. However, the real glaring issue in my opinion is that it's way too cramped to have the fights in these tiny domed arenas. Both during and after the playtest, I was trying to think of something that could help resolve this, and the only thing I could come up with is what if all 3 maps were connected in a triangle shape, and as the match progressed, one of the 3 would then eventually have the end match fog show up to push players closer together, kind of like the Eye of the Storm concept in Battle Royales. Then as the match goes on, the second circle would fill up, then the third one if either team wasn't able to capitalize and take home the victory. But while we're on the subject, I think the fog needs to be talked about too. Now, this is coming from a sniper main, but I think it gives way too much of an advantage to snipers and mouse users. If you haven't experienced this yourself, you can encounter this anomaly in both Graceland Sky City and the Eye of Misra. The lack of being able to see who's your allies or even lock on just seems like too much. Sure, maybe cut the radar out of the HUD and nerf everyone's range a bit, but to just outright cut out 9/10 of the roster's capabilities just isn't fun. While it changes up the pace a bit, in its current state, I really just don't think it brings anything worthwhile to the fight. I really feel like it just takes away from the match because everyone is just lost and confused. Hell, even as a sniper with the sandstorm happening on top of it, I'm just shooting everybody. Just trying to figure out if they're allies or not, and if they get a hit marker, I just don't think it works. Moving on now, I just have 2 last points of feedback that I didn't know where to fit in and aren't necessarily negative criticisms. So for the first one, I think that it would really help if teams were able to delay their respawn so they're able to sortie together with the full team. For an example, in Gundam Battle Operation 2, there are times where it's better to hold off on respawning so you can go in as a whole team because you don't want to just be drip feeding kills to the enemy with the staggered respawns. So far, that hasn't been as much of an issue with this game, but still think it's worth pointing out and could lead to some interesting strategies from teams. Lastly, we'll be covering the 3 strikers that I really feel like need some love. I'm sure you could probably guess 2 of the 3 would be Falcon and Illumine, but who might be the third? Well, that would be Inferno. When this striker first came through the hangar, I was pretty excited to see what an all-attack focus striker would be packing, and while I think its loadout is cool on its own, I just find it in a similar regard to Illumine, but instead of being in the shadow of Panaka, it's their sibling striker, Hurricane. If you couldn't tell by the way these things fight, both Inferno and Hurricane are made by the same manufacturer, which I was able to confirm from this answer by Chris in the Ask Dev portion of their Discord. Now, the attacks between these 2 are nearly identical, aside from the fact that Inferno is more, well, offense-oriented and Hurricane is more defense-oriented. But anytime I use them, I just felt like, well, why wouldn't I use Hurricane? The sheer utility of Hurricane's kit between the outer shield, the decoy shields, the shield, and the turret drones on top of the very similar laser attacks just seems too good to pass up when they're able to achieve as much damage as they do. I was glad to see that Inferno got a bit of a buff on the balance patch, but it really didn't feel like much to me. I feel like their energy regen skill could maybe be a little bit longer on top of everything else they did, but even then I just question what could be done to its kit to make it stand out compared to its defensive brother. It also doesn't really help that the patch gave Illusus's other form the same after image ability, taking away the one thing that made Inferno unique. Maybe as opposed to having an outer shield like Hurricane, it could do something similar to an assault armor where it expends all of its energy in a perimeter around itself, doing damage to strikers nearby and briefly blocking projectiles that come in contact with the energy. If anyone needs to take inspiration from Hurricane though, it's probably Falcon. I think Falcon needs some sort of flare system and or decoy drones that would follow it as opposed to Hurricanes to help them survive against snipers, melee, etc. As for Luminaire, I've genuinely got nothing. But what are your thoughts on the game? Where do you feel like things could improve, and what kind of strikers do you think they should come up with? All in all, I'm really excited for the future of this game, and as much as I'd like to geek out about the concept for a lightweight brawler with claws, I think I've rattled on enough for one day. If Chris or any of the Mecha BREAK devs see this, I just want to say thank you to everyone for all the hard work y'all have put in. I know I'm not alone when I say that we really appreciate all the open communication and just listening to our concerns. And a big thank you to everyone who watched this as well. I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing y'all on the battlefield. Peace!